Harrison Kane sat in his corner office, high above the city streets, the weight of another long day settling on his shoulders. The view from his window, a panorama of glass and steel, had once filled him with a sense of pride, of accomplishment. Now, it was just another reminder of everything that had slipped through his fingers. 18 months had passed since Celeste died, but her absence was a constant presence, a shadow that followed him through every hour of every day. Work had become his refuge, a place where he could lose himself in the numbers, in the deals, in the ruthless precision that had made him the success he was. There was comfort in the routine, in the predictability of deadlines and contracts, in the sharp, clean lines of spreadsheets and reports. But even here, in the heart of his empire, the memories of his wife lingered, seeping into the spaces where he tried to hide from them. Harrison had never been a man who let emotions rule him. He'd built his life on logic, on control, on keeping everything and everyone at a distance. It was how he'd survived, how he'd thrived. But since Celeste's death, something had shifted. He found himself distracted, haunted by the small, everyday things that used to be their life together. A book left open on a shelf, a half-empty bottle of her favorite perfume, a framed photograph on his desk. Each one was a reminder of the life he'd lost, and no amount of work could fill that void. It was around this time that he noticed the new cleaning lady. She was different from the others, though he couldn't say exactly why. Her name was Samantha, and she moved through the office with a quiet efficiency that should have gone unnoticed. Yet there was something about her presence that tugged at Harrison's attention, something in the way she carried herself that made him uneasy. She was careful, meticulous, and somehow, too observant. It started with small things. The way she lingered just a moment longer in certain parts of the office, particularly near Celeste's old desk. The way her fingers brushed lightly over the framed photograph on the side table, as if she were trying to absorb some essence from it. He began to notice these moments more and more, and each time, it sent a ripple of discomfort through him. Harrison wasn't a man prone to irrational fears, but his instincts had always served him well. And right now, those instincts were telling him that something wasn't quite right with Samantha. The wallet test was an idea that came to him one evening, as he watched her move through his office with that same calm, almost reverent demeanor. It was a simple plan: leave the wallet out in the open, in a place where she couldn't miss it, and see what she did. He didn't truly believe she would take it. Samantha didn't seem the type. But it wasn't about the money or the cards inside. It was about her reaction. Would she glance at it and move on, as any honest person would? Or would there be a flicker of hesitation, a sign that she was weighing her options? Harrison wanted to see how she handled the unexpected, how she reacted when things weren't as they should be. So that night, before leaving, Harrison carefully placed his wallet on the desk, just slightly askew, just enough to catch the eye. Then he walked to the corner of the room, where the large bookshelf stood, and selected a discreet spot among the books to place a hidden camera. It was a small, unobtrusive device, easily overlooked, but with a clear view of the desk and surrounding area. He adjusted the camera, making sure it would capture everything, then stepped back to assess his work. The office looked exactly as it should, orderly, controlled, with no sign of the trap he had just set. Satisfied, he turned off the lights, his mind already racing with what he might discover in the morning. The door clicked shut behind him as he left the office, the plan in motion, his suspicions waiting to be confirmed or dismissed. Harrison Kane had always valued precision. He believed in order, in things being where they were meant to be. It was a way of maintaining control in a world that so often seemed determined to strip it from him. But now, as he sat in his office, watching the footage from the night before, a cold discomfort settled in his chest. Samantha moved through the room with her usual efficiency. She dusted, wiped down surfaces, and straightened papers with the same care she applied to every task. Yet there was something off, something that made Harrison lean forward in his chair, eyes narrowing at the screen. She paused by the photograph on the side table, the one of Celeste, his late wife, smiling on their last vacation together. It was a small moment, barely a hesitation, but Harrison caught it. Samantha's hand hovered just above the frame, her fingertips grazing the edge as though she were tracing the lines of Celeste's face. Her lips moved, but the camera's audio didn't pick up the words, if there were any. The unease he'd felt the first time he noticed Samantha in his office returned, stronger now. What was she doing? Why this interest in Celeste's photo? Harrison rewound the footage, playing it back slowly, watching every detail. Samantha lingered over the photograph, her expression almost reverent. It wasn't just the photo, though. As he continued to watch, Harrison saw her stop at Celeste's old writing desk, the one he couldn't bear to part with after she died. The desk was more of a relic now, unused and mostly untouched. But Samantha seemed drawn to it. She wiped it down as usual, but then her hands stilled. She pressed her palms flat against the wood, closed her eyes, and stood there, as if absorbing something from the desk itself. A chill ran down Harrison's spine. This was no longer just a matter of curiosity, it was something deeper, something that brushed against the edges of his carefully guarded grief. He fast-forwarded through the rest of the footage, searching for more clues, more signs of what Samantha might be up to. She moved to the bookshelf next, where Celeste's favorite books were still lined up in their familiar order. Harrison had never touched them, couldn't bring himself to disturb the arrangement she'd so lovingly maintained. Samantha's fingers ran along the spines, her touch delicate, almost tender. Again, she paused, as though contemplating something before finally stepping back and finishing her work. Harrison's breath came a little faster now, his mind racing with questions. What did she want? Why was she so drawn to these things, these remnants of Celeste's life? His initial suspicions deepened, turning into something more, an obsession, perhaps, to uncover what lay behind Samantha's odd behavior. The following day, Harrison made a decision. He left out more items, objects that had once belonged to Celeste. A locket she used to wear, a book of poetry she'd loved, even her favorite fountain pen. He placed them strategically around the office, each one a potential trigger for whatever it was that Samantha was responding to. That evening, he left the office later than usual, his pulse quickening as he locked the door behind him. He didn't know what he was expecting to find the next morning, but the anticipation gnawed at him, keeping him awake through the night. When he returned to his office the following day, everything appeared untouched. The wallet was still where he'd left it, and the personal items were in their places, undisturbed at first glance. But Harrison knew better now. He quickly sat down at his desk, pulling up the camera feed, fast-forwarding to when Samantha entered the room. Once again, she moved with her typical calm, cleaning and straightening with practiced hands. But Harrison's breath caught as she approached the locket. She picked it up, holding it in her palm, her thumb rubbing over the engraved surface. Her lips moved, and though the audio was still useless, he could see the intensity in her expression, the way her eyes softened as if she were speaking to someone. It was as though she was having a conversation with Celeste, one that he wasn't privy to. The pen came next. Samantha didn't just clean around it, she picked it up, examined it, then placed it back down with a kind of reverence that bordered on the unsettling. Each item she touched seemed to carry a weight for her, a significance that Harrison couldn't understand but was determined to unravel. By the time she reached the book of poetry, Harrison's hands were clenched into fists, his heart pounding in his chest. Samantha opened the book, flipping through the pages until she reached a specific one. She paused there, staring at the words before slowly closing it and placing it back on the shelf. She lingered, her gaze distant, almost sorrowful, before she turned and left the room. Harrison sat back, staring at the screen long after Samantha had gone. Something was happening here, something he couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. This wasn't about the wallet anymore, or even about whether she was trustworthy. It was about Celeste, about the things she had left behind, and the strange connection that Samantha seemed to have with them. He had to know more. He had to find out what Samantha knew, what she was seeing or feeling that he wasn't. And for the first time in a long while, Harrison Kane felt a fear that wasn't rooted in business or power, but in the unknown, in the possibility that his wife was trying to tell him something from beyond the grave. Harrison waited until the office was empty. The day's business had been handled, the office staff long gone, leaving only silence. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the footage he'd just reviewed. Samantha's actions, her reverence, the way she lingered near Celeste's things, were too precise, too deliberate. There was something she wasn't telling him, something he needed to confront head-on. He called Samantha to his office. When she entered, her demeanor was calm, almost serene, as if she had been expecting this conversation. Harrison studied her, trying to read the face of the woman who had unsettled him so profoundly over the past weeks. "Close the door," he said, his voice firmer than usual. She complied without hesitation. Harrison didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What's going on, Samantha? I've noticed your behavior. The way you handle certain things in this office. It's unusual." Samantha remained composed, her eyes steady on his. "I understand why you'd think that, Mr. Kane. Do you?" His tone was sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're here for reasons other than your job." Samantha took a deep breath, and Harrison saw a flicker of something, was it relief, cross her face. "You're right. I'm not just here to clean your office." Harrison's pulse quickened. "Then why are you here?" There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence before Samantha spoke again, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "I'm here because of your wife, Mr. Kane. I'm a psychic. I can communicate with spirits. Celeste has been trying to reach you through me." Harrison stared at her, the words hanging in the air between them, impossible to grasp. A psychic? Communicating with spirits? It was absurd. And yet, the way Samantha spoke, with such calm certainty, left him off balance. "You expect me to believe that," he said, though his voice lacked its usual edge. "I don't expect anything," Samantha replied. "I'm just telling you the truth. Celeste has been trying to send you messages for some time now, but the connection has been difficult. That's why I took this job, to get closer to you, to help her reach you." Harrison shook his head, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "How did you even end up here? How did you know she was trying to reach me?" "I've encountered situations like this before," Samantha explained, her tone patient. "When messages are unclear, when the spirit is struggling to connect, I sometimes try to get closer to the family, to the places where they lived, to better understand what they're trying to say. I tried to contact you directly, but when that didn't work, I looked for another way. When I saw there was a position available here, I applied. It was the best way to be near you and the things that held meaning for Celeste." The logic behind her actions sent a chill down Harrison's spine. "You're saying you planned this? That you've been, what? Watching me?" "No," Samantha said quickly. "Not watching. Just trying to help. Celeste's messages have been coming through stronger since I started working here, but they're still fragmented. She's concerned, Mr. Kane. There's something she desperately needs to tell you." Harrison wanted to dismiss her, to call this all nonsense and send her on her way. But there was something in her eyes, in the quiet intensity of her voice, that made him pause. "And what exactly has she been telling you?" Samantha hesitated, and for the first time, Harrison saw uncertainty in her expression. "It's mostly feelings, images, memories. She's worried about you. She's been showing me moments from your life together, things that only she would know. She mentioned a song, Night and Day. She said it was your song, that she sang it to you on your wedding night. She showed me an image of you two dancing in a room with a red door. She wanted you to remember that night." Harrison's breath caught in his throat. The song, the red door, those were details no one could know. The memory of their wedding night flooded back to him, a night so private, so intimate that it was impossible for anyone else to have known about it. And yet, here was Samantha, recounting it with an accuracy that shook him to his core. How do you know these things? He demanded, his voice faltering. Celeste showed them to me, Samantha said softly. She's trying to reach you, to tell you that she's still here, still watching over you. But there's something more, something urgent that she needs you to understand. Harrison felt the room tilt, the ground beneath his feet unsteady. He had spent months trying to lock away his grief, to compartmentalize the pain of losing Celeste. And now, in a single moment, all those barriers were crumbling. Why should I believe any of this? Harrison asked, though the fight was draining from his voice. You don't have to believe me, Samantha replied, her eyes meeting his with quiet strength. But you know Celeste. You know she wouldn't rest if there was something important she needed to tell you. And she's chosen me to help you hear her. Harrison looked at Samantha, the weight of her words settling on his chest. The skepticism he had clung to was unraveling, and in its place, a new, terrifying possibility was taking root. If Celeste was really trying to reach him, then ignoring it was no longer an option. But what could be so important, so urgent, that she would go to such lengths to communicate from beyond the grave? As he stood there, the world spinning around him, Harrison Kane realized he had no choice but to find out. Harrison stared at Samantha, the shock of her revelation still rippling through him like a jolt of electricity. He felt the ground shift beneath him, his carefully constructed world teetering on the edge of collapse. For a moment, the room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing in with the weight of the impossible truth she had just laid at his feet. But then, just as quickly, the disbelief surged back, a wave of anger and denial that forced him to his feet. This is absurd, he snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. You've overstepped, Samantha. I don't believe a word of it. Samantha didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes steady on his, as if she had expected this reaction. I know it's hard to believe, Mr. Kane. But everything I've told you is the truth. Get out, Harrison ordered, his tone final. You're fired. I don't want to see you in this house again. For a moment, Samantha hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, to plead her case. But then she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry you feel that way, she said quietly. But if you change your mind, you know how to reach me. Harrison didn't respond. He watched her leave, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the empty house. He stood there for a long moment, his fists clenched at his sides, willing the anger to drown out the gnawing doubt that had taken root inside him. But as the hours ticked by, the anger began to ebb, leaving only the doubt behind. Harrison tried to focus on his work, burying himself in contracts and figures, but his mind kept circling back to Samantha's words, to the image of her standing there in his office, speaking with such calm certainty about things she had no business knowing. By evening, the doubt had grown into something larger, something he could no longer ignore. He knew he should let it go, move on, dismiss her claims as nonsense. But something deep inside him, something he had been trying to silence for years, was telling him that she might be right. As night fell, Harrison found himself staring at the phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he dialed Samantha's number. She answered on the first ring. Mr. Kane, she said, her voice devoid of surprise. I was expecting your call. Harrison's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. Come back tomorrow. I want to hear more. The next day, Samantha arrived promptly, her demeanor as calm and composed as ever. Harrison led her to the living room, where Celeste's presence still lingered in every corner, in every carefully chosen piece of furniture, in the photographs that lined the walls. It was a room he rarely entered anymore, too full of memories he wasn't ready to confront. But today, it felt like the right place to be. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them palpable. Harrison's gaze drifted to a photograph of Celeste on the mantel, her smile warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the turmoil he felt inside. Tell me, Harrison said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Tell me what she's been trying to say. Samantha closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as she reached out, connecting with the presence that only she could feel. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost reverent. Celeste wants you to know that she forgave you, Harrison. She knew about the affair. She knew about the child you had with that other woman. Harrison's heart slammed against his chest. He stared at Samantha, his mind reeling. He had buried that part of his life so deep, convinced that no one, especially Celeste, had ever known. The affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness during a rough patch in their marriage, something he had tried to forget the moment it ended. But the child. The son. He had known about him, of course, but he had never acknowledged him, never reached out, never accepted responsibility. And now, to hear that Celeste had known all along, that she had kept that knowledge to herself, forgiven him without ever breathing a word, was more than he could comprehend. How could she have known, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. I never told her. She never said anything. She didn't want to burden you with it, Samantha said gently. She loved you, Harrison. She understood that you regretted what you had done, and she chose to forgive you because she believed in your love, in your commitment to her. But she also knew that one day, you would need to face the truth. Harrison felt a tear slip down his cheek, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him like a vice. Why now? He asked, his voice trembling. Why is she telling me this now? Because the boy needs you, Samantha replied, her gaze unwavering. He's sick, Harrison. Seriously ill. His mother can't afford the treatment he needs, and Celeste can't rest knowing that you're out there, capable of helping, but unaware of the situation. She wants you to step up, to be the father you never were. Harrison's world spun out of control. The guilt he had managed to push aside for so many years now flooded him, drowning him in its intensity. He had failed his son, failed Celeste, and now, in the worst possible way, he was being called to account. I don't know if I can do this, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. You can, Samantha said, her voice firm but kind. You have to. Celeste believes in you, and she's asking you to make this right. It's not too late, Harrison. You can still help him. You can still be the father he needs. Harrison's hands trembled as he buried his face in them, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was being asked of him. But deep down, he knew Samantha was right. He couldn't ignore this any longer. He couldn't keep running from his past. When he finally looked up, there was a new resolve in his eyes. I'll find him, he said, his voice steadying. I'll find my son and make things right. Samantha nodded, a small smile of approval on her lips. Celeste knew you would. Harrison had always been good with words. He knew how to turn a phrase, how to convince others to see things his way. But standing on Melody's doorstep, he realized that no amount of persuasion could undo the damage he had done. Her eyes were cold, her face set in a mask of controlled fury that spoke of years of hurt and betrayal. What are you doing here, Harrison? Melody's voice was like ice, slicing through the quiet of the afternoon. Harrison felt his throat tighten. He had rehearsed what he would say, but now, faced with the reality of the woman he had wronged so deeply, the words seemed hollow. Melody, I know I'm the last person you want to see. But I need to talk to you, about our son. The mention of their child made her stiffen, her eyes narrowing. Our son, she repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. You don't have a son, Harrison. You made that perfectly clear when you walked out on us. Remember? Harrison winced, the truth of her words cutting him deeper than he'd expected. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice thick with regret. I was a coward, and I handled everything horribly. But I'm here now because I want to help. Melody crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hardening even further. Help, she spat. You think you can just show up after all these years and fix everything with your money? You thought you could buy me off back then, and now you think you can buy your way out of the guilt? It doesn't work that way, Harrison. He could see the pain in her eyes, the way it had festered over the years, turning into something sharp and bitter. Melody, please. I've changed. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to do the right thing now. I've heard our son is sick, and I can't just stand by and do nothing. How did you even know about that? She snapped, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Have you been spying on us? How dare you? No, Harrison interrupted, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I haven't been spying. I swear. I didn't even know where you were until recently. I found out because of a psychic. Melody stared at him, her disbelief turning to anger. A psychic? You really expect me to believe that? Harrison Kane, the man who doesn't believe in anything he can't control, is here because a psychic told him to be? I know how it sounds, Harrison said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. But it's the truth. Samantha, she's the psychic, came to me with messages from Celeste. Celeste? Melody's voice trembled with fury. Your wife? The one you stayed with while you abandoned me and your son? Yes, Harrison replied, swallowing hard. Celeste knew about our son, Melody. She knew everything, and she's been trying to tell me that I need to help him, to be there for him in a way I wasn't before. Melody's hands clenched into fists, her body trembling with rage. So now you're trying to pin this on your dead wife? You think that makes it better? You think that's going to erase the years of struggle, of raising a child on my own, while you lived your perfect life? Harrison's heart sank. He had hurt her more deeply than he had ever realized, and nothing he could say now would make up for that. Melody, I'm not trying to erase anything. I just want to help our son. Please, let me do that. Melody took a step forward, her eyes blazing with anger. You don't get to do this, Harrison. You don't get to waltz back into our lives and pretend to care. You made your choice a long time ago, and now you have to live with it. I don't want your help, and neither does my son. You need to leave. Now. Harrison opened his mouth to protest, but the look in her eyes silenced him. There was no more room for negotiation, no more chances to make things right. He had pushed her too far, and now he was paying the price. Without another word, he turned and walked away, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in his ears as he made his way back to his car. As he drove away, the weight of his past bore down on him, suffocating any hope he had of redemption. Melody sat by her son's bedside, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The hospital room was dimly lit, the hum of machines the only sound breaking the silence. Her son, Simon, had always been a fighter, but lately, the fight seemed to be slipping from him, the strength that had carried him through so much now waning in the face of an illness that refused to be beaten. She hadn't slept much in days, too afraid to close her eyes and miss something important. Every cough, every labored breath, felt like another step closer to the edge, and the fear that had gripped her for so long was now a constant, gnawing ache in her chest. She had done everything she could to protect Simon, to give him the best chance at life, but she was out of options, out of time. And then there was Harrison. The thought of him brought a fresh wave of anger, mingled with a deep, painful resentment. He had left them, turned his back on their son before he was even born. How dare he think he could just reappear, as if nothing had happened? Yet, as much as she wanted to shut him out, there was another part of her, the part that was desperate to save her son, that couldn't ignore the possibility that Harrison could help. Another cough racked Simon's small body, pulling Melody from her thoughts. She leaned over, brushing a hand across his forehead, her heart breaking as he stirred weakly. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She had to think of Simon, not her pride, not her pain. With a deep breath, Melody reached for her phone, her hand trembling as she dialed the number she had promised herself she wouldn't use. It rang once, twice, and then Harrison's voice came through, tense and alert. Melody, he said, his voice cutting through the static of the line. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. Harrison, she hesitated, the words catching in her throat. I need your help. Simon, he needs your help. There was a brief silence, and she could almost hear the relief in his voice when he finally responded. I'll be there as soon as I can. True to his word, Harrison acted swiftly. Within hours, Simon was transferred to one of the best hospitals in the city, a facility known for its cutting-edge treatments and round-the-clock care. Harrison was a whirlwind of efficiency, making arrangements, signing documents, and ensuring that every possible resource was available to his son. Melody watched him in a daze, the speed and precision with which he moved both astonishing and disorienting. When the doctors confirmed that Simon was settled and stable, Harrison turned to Melody, his expression earnest. I want to meet him, he said, his voice steady but with an edge of vulnerability she hadn't heard before. I need to see my son. Melody hesitated, the old anger flaring up, but it was tempered now by exhaustion and the undeniable fact that Harrison had done everything he could to help. He had taken control, made things happen that she never could have on her own, and for that, she was grateful, no matter how much she wished she didn't have to be. After a long moment, she nodded. Okay. But please, be gentle with him. He's been through so much. Harrison nodded, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders as he followed Melody into the hospital room. The sight of Simon lying in the bed, pale and frail, hit Harrison like a physical blow. He had known the boy was ill, but seeing him in person, so small and vulnerable, brought the reality crashing down on him with brutal force. Harrison approached the bed slowly, his eyes taking in every detail, the dark circles under Simon's eyes, the thinness of his arms, the way his breath hitched with each inhale. He felt a surge of emotions, guilt, sorrow, determination, mixing into a fierce resolve. This was his son, his flesh and blood, and he would move heaven and earth to save him. Simon's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, the boy looked up at Harrison with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Who are you? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Harrison's heart ached at the question, but he forced a smile. I'm your father, Simon, he said gently. I'm here to help you get better. Simon blinked, processing the words. My father, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. Yes, Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before, but I'm here now. And I promise, I'll do everything I can to help you. Simon nodded weakly, the effort of speaking clearly tiring him out. He closed his eyes again, drifting back into the uneasy sleep that had become his constant companion. Harrison remained by his side, his hand resting lightly on Simon's, feeling the fragility of the small fingers beneath his. Over the following days, Harrison threw himself into caring for Simon with a single-minded determination. He coordinated with the doctors, stayed by his son's bedside through the long hours, and ensured that no expense was spared in securing the best possible care. He barely slept, his focus entirely on Simon, on giving him the chance he had denied the boy for so long. Melody watched him, still wary, still guarded, but slowly, her walls began to crack. She saw the genuine care in Harrison's eyes, the regret that shadowed his every action, and the fierce love he was beginning to build for the son he had never known. It was impossible to ignore, even as she struggled to reconcile it with the man who had hurt her so deeply. One evening, as Simon slept peacefully for the first time in days, Melody found herself sitting next to Harrison outside the hospital room. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, but there was a tentative truce in the air. I can't keep him from you, Melody said finally, her voice soft but resolute. He deserves to know his father. And I can see how much you care about him. Harrison looked at her, surprised by the admission. I never meant to hurt you, Melody, he said, his voice low. I was a fool, and I'm sorry for everything I put you through. But I'm here now, and I want to be a father to Simon. I want to be the man he needs me to be. Melody nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Just, don't break his heart, Harrison. He's been through enough. Harrison reached out, placing his hand over hers. I won't, he promised. I'll do whatever it takes to make up for the time I've lost. I'll be here, for both of you, for as long as you'll have me. As the days passed, Simon's health began to improve under the expert care of the medical team. Harrison stayed by his side, reading to him, talking to him, slowly building a bond that had been so long denied. Each small victory, every smile, every moment of laughter, felt like a step closer to healing, not just for Simon, but for all of them. The weeks turned into months, and as time passed, Harrison found himself spending more and more time with Simon. The boy was gaining strength, his cheeks filling out, his laughter returning in small bursts that lit up the room. Harrison marveled at how resilient Simon was, how despite everything he had endured, there was still light in his eyes, still hope. For Harrison, those moments were more than just small victories, they were the foundation of a relationship he had never imagined he would have. He read to Simon every night, told him stories about places they would visit once he was better, and, slowly but surely, they began to talk about their shared past. The conversations were tentative at first, filled with gaps and hesitations, but over time, the gaps began to close. Harrison told Simon about the mistakes he had made, about the regret that had weighed on him for so long. He didn't shy away from the truth, didn't try to sugarcoat the pain of it, because he owed Simon that much, honesty, even when it hurt. Simon listened, sometimes quietly, sometimes with questions that caught Harrison off guard with their insight and depth. And as Harrison opened up, he found that the bond between them grew stronger, more natural. It was as if they were two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their place, clicking together in a way that felt both inevitable and profound. The day Harrison decided to publicly acknowledge Simon as his son was one of the most difficult and liberating of his life. He had spent years building a reputation as a man of power, of control, but this, admitting to the world that he had a child he had never claimed, was an act of vulnerability he wasn't sure he was capable of. But when he looked at Simon, saw the boy's tentative smile and the way he was slowly coming back to life, there was no doubt in his mind. It was time. Harrison made the announcement in the same way he had handled every other major decision in his life, with purpose and determination. But this time, it wasn't just about business or reputation, it was about setting things right, about giving Simon the recognition and the future he deserved. And when the news broke, when the world learned that Harrison Kane had a son he was finally acknowledging, the weight that had pressed down on him for so long began to lift. For Melody, the public acknowledgement brought a peace she hadn't known in years. She had spent so long carrying the burden of their secret, so many nights wondering if she had made the right decision by staying silent, by protecting Simon from the man who had once hurt her so deeply. But now, seeing Harrison step up, seeing the love he was building with their son, she felt something shift inside her. The anger, the resentment, it wasn't gone, not completely, but it was softened by the realization that people could change, that Harrison had changed. And in that change, there was hope for a different future, one where they could work together for the sake of the child they both loved. It was on one of those quiet evenings, when Simon was finally sleeping peacefully and the hospital room was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, that Samantha visited again. Harrison hadn't seen her in weeks, but when she arrived, it was as if no time had passed at all. She entered the room with her usual calm presence, her eyes warm as she looked at Harrison and Melody sitting together. Samantha, Harrison greeted her, his voice tinged with both gratitude and curiosity. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Samantha smiled gently. I have one last message for you, Harrison, she said, her voice carrying a weight that made him sit up a little straighter. Celeste wants you to know that she's at peace now. She's seen the way you've stepped up, the way you've cared for Simon and made him a part of your life. She's grateful to you for that. She's grateful that you've become the man she always believed you could be. Harrison felt his throat tighten, the emotion catching him off guard. She's at peace, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Samantha nodded. Yes. She's happy for you, Harrison. She knows you're in good hands now, with Simon and Melody. She won't need to communicate anymore, because she trusts that you'll continue to do right by them. It's time for you to move forward, to live your life with your new family. Harrison swallowed hard, the tears he had held back for so long finally welling up in his eyes. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for bringing her messages to me. I don't know how to ever repay you for what you've done. Samantha's smile widened, and there was a twinkle in her eye that hinted at a deeper understanding. There's no need for repayment, Harrison. I was simply the messenger. What you've done with those messages, that's all you. As she turned to leave, Harrison felt a sudden urge to ask her to stay, to tell him more about what she saw, what she knew. But he held back, realizing that Samantha's role in his life had come to its natural conclusion. She had helped him find his way, helped him rebuild the broken parts of his life, and now it was up to him to carry on. Samantha paused at the door, looking back at Harrison and Melody one last time. Take care of each other, she said softly. And if you ever need me, well, you know where to find me. And with that, she was gone, leaving behind an air of mystery that seemed to fit her perfectly. Harrison sat back, his gaze drifting to the sleeping figure of his son. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would be challenges, moments of doubt, and the inevitable scars of the past. But for the first time in a long time, Harrison felt a sense of peace, of purpose, that had eluded him for so long. As he and Melody settled into their new roles, co-parents, partners in this new chapter of their lives, Harrison knew that Celeste would always be a part of them, guiding them in ways both seen and unseen. Her love, her forgiveness, had paved the way for a future he hadn't thought possible, and he would carry that with him always. But there was also the future to think about, a future where Simon would grow stronger, where he would know the love of both his parents, where they could be a family, not in the way Harrison had once envisioned, but in a way that was real and true, and filled with the promise of new beginnings. And somewhere out there, Harrison knew, Samantha was continuing her work, helping others find their way, just as she had helped him. Maybe, just maybe, their paths would cross again. But until then, he had a life to live, a son to raise, and a heart that was finally, truly open to the possibilities of what could be.